Welcome to the IONS podcast. This is your host, Cam Dales, co-founder of Peak Energy. And today we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, technology and also manufacturing scale of sodium-ion batteries. And I have with me what I think is probably one of the top three most knowledgeable scientists in the Western world on the topic. There's a lot of excitement in the industry about sodium-ion. There's some nuances about the different types of chemistries, which lead to wildly different conclusions on whether sodium will be the next big thing in batteries or not. And a lot of that is difficult to unpack unless you are actively working on the science of it, and most of that is happening in China. So I have with me today Dr. Brandon Kelly, leads cell R&D and engineering at Peak Energy. He spends every waking hour and half of his dreams at night thinking about sodium ion. Yeah. He spends, I don't know, how many hours a week are you on the phone with China?
It's a lot.
And that's when you're not there physically in factories working hand in hand with science. So our goal today is to explain a little bit about the world of sodium ion, why it's interesting, what the challenges are, and what the cutting edge understanding is, which is really not very well known here in the United States. We've seen, because of the potential, a lot of excitement, but also skepticism. There's been some papers that have come out at Stanford talking about learning curves and costs that I think are adding interesting points to the conversation, but also need some inputs kind of from what's really happening in the real world. There's some initial test data that's happening at some of the national labs, buying cells off of Alibaba and blowing them up with predictable results. So we would love the opportunity today, Brandon, to dig into some of the research and some of the real world results that we're seeing, both in our own labs, your lab, but also in the labs of our partners in China, which is really at the cutting edge, like in many things in batteries. Yeah. So welcome to the pod, Brandon.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Yeah, that's a fun topic that I cannot stop thinking about.
That's great. Well, let's start a little bit with just setting the stage with your background. You were one of the key technical contributors at a company called Solid Power in solid state batteries, previous to Peak. Why don't you kind of tell us your journey from, school through a little bit of Solid Power? I'd love to get into some detail on that later, but tell us how you ended up thinking and dreaming of sodium-ion batteries all day and all night.
So actually, when I went to college, I wasn't interested in batteries at all.
Me either, by the way. I hated chemistry. That was my worst class in college. And here I am, spent my entire career
that makes two of us.
In materials and chemistry.
Cruel irony in life sometimes. Yeah, same thing for me. So I went in for mechanical engineering, actually. I grew up racing dirt bikes and wanted to make dirt bike parts. And so
there you go.
That's why I got into that. And then almost immediately I got into a material science class, and, it was really piqued my interest. And trying to understand, why things behave the way that they do. You quickly move from, through different disciplines of engineering and into materials pretty quickly. And I had an opportunity to work in a battery lab early in undergrad, kind of help get it up and running. And that's my first exposure to batteries. And now I've been doing batteries for almost 20 years, actually.
Right.
And so initially, started working on cathode development stuff. That's what I did my PhD on. And then, transitioned in with actually Josh Garrett, who I went to grad school with at Solid Power, and I was in the first couple of folks there, and, spent a decade trying to industrialize solid-state batteries. So that was... I was ready to.
You picked the easiest problem in all of batteries to go work on.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about solid-state batteries is technology was so immature in the early days that you weren't the thing I liked about it was there was not incremental improvements.
Yeah.
It was
There were no
orders of
constraints.
magnitude.
You're not
Yeah.
just polishing the apple.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, this thing only works at, C over 170 degrees. So you got a ways to go.
Yes.
But, there's a lot of potential, and so
Yes.
that's the thing I liked about it was there was so much upside to it and so much green space,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
I got in and my goal there was to really like try and help give the technology a chance, right? And so, mainly focused on...
Could be a song.
Yeah, give it a chance, yeah.
Give technology a chance.
Yeah, I mean, there's
The
a
John
lot of
Lennon
steps.
of batteries right there.
Yeah, I mean, so
So you were at Solid Power for almost a decade.
yep, that's
We should
right.
definitely talk about solid-state batteries.
Yeah.
We'll get to that later. But you made a change in your career.
Yep.
Came to Peak
Yes.
with the idea of working on sodium-ion batteries. So for our listeners, mostly this is a podcast for industry insiders. I think most people probably know broadly what a sodium-ion battery is. But
Yeah.
why don't we start with what is a sodium-ion battery?
Okay. Yeah. So sodium-ion battery, very, very similar to a lithium-ion battery. Difference is just the charge carrier, basically. Even there's a lot of analogs in the materials themselves, actually. Their crystal structures and things like that. The materials of construction are very, very similar. The way that you make them is very, very similar. But basically all it is, you sub out the lithium for sodium and treat it almost identically.
And so does that mean just like in lithium-ion where there are different flavors of lithium-ion chemistries which have extremely different properties? Is that true for sodium as well?
100%, yeah.
Walk
And
us
it's
through
very
kind of what are the flavors there. And this I think gets to, part of the difficulty in having a conversation around sodium-ion batteries.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a sodium-ion battery.
Yeah.
There are, various chemistries within the class of chemistries that use sodium as a charge carrier.
Yeah, no, that's true. And, it's also the case in lithium where it's, there's many versions of lithium, and then it's a snapshot in time as to what that thing is, right? So for sodium specifically, I'll draw the analogs. So there's a layered oxide cathode version of sodium, very similar to a layered oxide version of lithium. And
what do you mean by layered oxide?
So that's just the type of cathode active material. So in lithium ion, they're called NMC batteries, so nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide, basically. And it's a layered oxide structure that basically lithium inserts and intercalate and deintercalate in the cathode structure
Slips
itself.
in between the different layers.
Exactly right. And so because of its crystal structure, that gives it different, actual electrochemical properties too. Like how does it behave in safety? How does it behave for rate performance? What does its stability look like? And there's a lot of actually mechanical analogs to how these things behave. So if you're thinking about layered oxide materials, if it's just a stack of, it's literally like a stack of layers and you're pulling out an entire layer of material, like that's going to greatly impact the stability of the structure. Whereas if you've got something that's more like a three-dimensional structure, like a spinel lithium manganate, where it's got good three-dimensional structure, and you're pulling the sodium in the lithium in 3 dimensions out of the structure, it's still stable. There's
I'm thinking of, building houses out of cards or pickup sticks where you pull a little piece out and then the whole thing collapses.
That's definitely part of it. And then, how big those tunnels are, impacts rate performance and things like that. LFP, so lithium iron phosphate's another one where it has a more three-dimensional structure, but the ions actually only move in one plane. So that's one of the reasons that it has, rate challenges.
And LFP in our industry, in the ESS space, it's by far the dominant chemistry now on the lithium side.
Yeah, it is actually, which is great.
And why? Why is that?
So it kind of finally lived up to its promise, right? So when it came out, it's like, oh man, there's not nickel and cobalt and things that are, more difficult to get. It's iron. It should be good at all these things, but actually when I started working on it, it was trash. It actually had really bad performance. So now it's matured a lot and got to the point where it's extremely stable and cost effective. And that was it was more expensive, didn't cycle as well, had worse rate performance. It was kind of worse at everything when it started.
And now it's the opposite.
Now it's the opposite, right? And this is kind of funny. So as it matured, it came in and took a big part of the market, for electric vehicles, or it's continuing to grow there. It's dominating energy storage today because leaning into what it's good at, right? So relative to NMC materials, LFP has a lower energy density, but a lower cost, improved stability, and improved safety, right? And if we're drawing analogs to sodium-ion, there's a version of sodium-ion called NFPP. It's one of the polyanion flavors, and I'll get back and continue to define those. But it is basically LFP's LFP, right? So the way that LFP relates to NMC materials is how NFPP relates to LFP.
So it's lower cost, higher stability, better safety, but lower energy density.
Exactly right. And a lot of that is just the physics of it, right? So it's why is it good at these things and not good at these other things? And as it matures, it's pretty obvious.
Great. So LFP,
Yep.
lithium iron phosphate,
Yep.
NFPP, what's that?
Yeah. So sodium iron phosphate pyrophosphate.
And what does pyrophosphate mean?
So it's just a different structure of a phosphate group. So in lithium iron phosphates, LiFe PO4. Okay, PO4 is the phosphate.
Yep.
In this case, it's Na4 Fe3 PO42. That's the phosphate. Pyrophosphate is P2O7. So it's big, gnarly crystal structure that is just super stable and moves sodium, really easily.
So what's in NFPP? It's basically sodium, salt.
Yep. Iron, phosphorus, oxygen.
And phosphorus and oxygen.
Yep.
Phosphates are basically fertilizer. You spread them on the ground like manure.
That's right. Yeah. If it was only that easy to get them into battery-grade materials.
Yeah. But, this brings up one of the key advantages or promises of sodium-ion battery world, right, which is a more robust, diverse, and low-cost supply chain. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's exciting about sodium. So, it's about 10x more abundant, than the lithium resources, which is really exciting. And then, soda ash, it's actually sodium carbonate, is actually one of the most used industrial materials, globally today. So it's already at scale.
I think I read it was the 10th most used inorganic material in the world.
Yeah.
Number one is water. So that's the kind of category we're in.
Yeah, which is cool, right? That's something that you want to be used if you're going.
And what is soda ash used for typically in industrial uses today?
All sorts of chemical processing, but also in glass.
So soda lime glass.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So every window and beer bottle, this is the material that goes into it. And where in the United States, where is this found? And is this like lithium, where we got to go to the local council and get them to approve a new mine?
No, I mean, the good news is because it's already at scale and it's in Wyoming, which is kind of my, close to my neck of the woods in Colorado. The mines are already established, and the volumes even for this production are like a drop in the bucket to what they're doing today. Right. So it's making sure that you can show the demand, get the supply and get it converted into the active material that you're after. So I think the sodium story is a pretty easy one as far as supply chain goes.
So this is around NFPP, and there are other benefits we should talk about in terms of where we think it's going in cost. There's a complex discussion around safety. Yep. All of these things, of course, depend very specifically on the type of sodium-ion chemistry that we're talking about. And when we started the company, and when you joined the company, it seemed like it was not very well understood in the United States anyway, and perhaps the Western world. Which flavor of sodium-ion was appropriate for which applications and what was going to win. Can you when you took a look at the the landscape. What did it look like? This was maybe 2 years ago,
Yeah.
something like that.
No, and so let me finish defining the sodium flavors real quick.
Okay.
I think we came up short there, but the material that we're talking about, that NFPP, is actually very not widely published. It hasn't been worked on very much. So I think we talked about the layered oxides. There's another group of material called Prussian blue and Prussian blue analogs, right? It's a different version, also iron-based, and it has its pros and cons there. And then there's polyanion materials. And NFPP that we referenced before, it falls into that category. But the most widely publicized version of that is actually a vanadium-containing compound called NVP. And that is great, but it doesn't have the same cost upside because vanadium in the bill of materials. So one of the things that's super attractive about some of the other chemistries is, the cost of atoms floor is super low. And with this one, that's just going to be an uphill battle for that material that's baked in. And so because of that, so when I joined, it was basically, it was super dynamic when I joined, and more or less I was a tech scout, So I read up on sodium-ion batteries, understand from the literature where I think we're at, did a little bit of competitive analysis on who's out there trying to do sodium today globally, and then we went to China, basically.
And the word in the West was what?
Is layered oxide. That's the winner, right? Look at the energy density. Look at all these great properties. It's been worked on a lot, and it's kind of the same reason why. I mean, sodium-ion batteries are actually older than lithium-ion batteries, but people just stopped working on them and focused on lithium because energy density, and we were focused on mobility, right?
Right.
And so as that got better and better, then we really actually, what sparked working on sodium again was a lithium carbonate bump we had a couple of years ago. Brought sodium back into the focus. But that doesn't mean that no one was working on it.
Right.
There are companies that have been working on it for over a decade, maturing it, and it's getting better and better. But the people who were working on that were focused on the high energy stuff because that's what you can raise money for, is higher energy stuff.
Closest to being applicable to electric vehicles.
Yeah, automotive, right? I mean, that's what you raise. That's a huge market, right? And so that's why everybody, it's like a lot of gravity. Like if you've got a new battery technology, it's always pulling you towards automotive because the volumes are so high. But I don't think that that's necessarily where this technology is happy. But layered oxide is.
And from
is
a
closer.
market perspective, I think one of the really interesting points in time that we're at now in the battery space is that up until maybe 2 years ago, the markets for things outside of consumer electronics, sort of one category of mobility, and then EVs, were really not large enough to support chemistries that were specific to that application, and particularly grid storage. And then with the absolute taking off of demand driven probably by low-cost renewables and then firming of those renewables on the grid, the market finally got to be big enough where, pulling technologies that were maybe not optimum for these mobile applications, pulling them out of the lab and actually getting them to meaningful world scale became a thing.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of I think the basis for our company and many of the companies that are working actively now in the grid storage space.
That makes sense. And so when I joined, there was already the thesis that, sodium was going to be the winner here, right? And from the publications, I could understand a little bit, but the more and more I understand about sodium-ion in general, the more I can see exactly why, for grid storage specifically, this is basically tailor-made.
Yeah. Well, I think it was like your first week at the company. We literally got on a plane. We went to Sweden to talk to folks who are working on the PBA chemistries. We went straight from there to China. Some interesting stories about getting into China, visa issues. We somehow managed to get through the border police, and we're sitting in one of the largest battery companies in the world. And I remember this so vividly because I think it was you and me, right? And they're explaining to us how bad sodium-ion batteries are. And we're thinking, oh no,
Yeah.
we just launched a whole company on batteries, and the cost isn't going to be competitive with LFP.
Yep.
The cycle life is not going to be good. It's not good enough to work for an ESS application, and the safety is actually worse than LFP.
That's right.
And we're going, shit, that's not a good start for peak energy. That was the first half of the meeting. What happened in the second half of the meeting?
No, that's very true. It was like, kind of picking my job off the table, right? And because, in the literature and what I could read from these other companies is like, oh, it's promising here. But the vendor that we were at had already ran that one to ground.
Yeah.
And
the punchline is,
it's not going to do it.
Right.
It's not. So this is specifically for layered oxide cathode.
Exactly.
Sodium-ion flavor. It's really tough. The ones that are stable use a different bill of materials. And so to get there on cycle life, like the cost is going to be more challenging. And because it's one of the oxide materials, means like during thermal runaway, it releases oxygen, which makes for a much spicier thermal runaway. Which means it's actually not better than LFP on safety for that particular version. And so we get through that, and then you start talking about this other material, which I'd actually never even heard of, NFPP. Actually, ironically, I'd worked on pyrophosphates a long time ago, but it was for lithium flavor, and they were awful. Even LFP was bad then, but LFPP was even worse, right? So it's lithium version. So
right.
So they start talking about that, and starting to show data, right, of like really good cycling, ability. And then I'm starting to learn like this isn't just lab scale results. These are large format prismatic cells that are producing these results. And that was really, I think, the turning point in my mind where it's like, okay, I've seen, indications that are real positive, for sodium ion, a couple reality checks on a couple versions. Not that is not a viable technology. I think that it is, but maybe just not for this application. Right? What's going to meet this today?
Which is such a key point, because I think what's lost in a lot of the debates, particularly on the academic side, is there are very specific chemistries solutions for specific applications. And what is the optimum for a grid storage battery might and likely is not the optimum for an electric vehicle application.
Or a scooter or something like that.
Which is kind of the critique of using lithium-ion batteries for grid-scale storage.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the default choice because it's the only thing at scale.
Yeah.
But if a fundamentally better chemistry reached scale, which of course means China, that will ultimately, our thesis is that will take significant share from LFP.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
So application is super important when we have these debates.
100%. That's, and you got to look at the whole picture, right? It has to be application based. It's not just what is this cell cost, what is its energy density, things like that. It's like, what does a solution based on this technology do? You know, and is that better served, this market? And for energy storage, you want something to go out and just sit in a field and be super reliable, and degrade extremely slowly. And
don't catch fire.
And don't catch fire, or, at least, don't burn your neighbors down kind of situation.
Yeah.
And I think like people in general, we're on a good trajectory there. We started with, again, kind of use what you've got using NMC materials, and that is not using the right technology for broad scale energy storage, I think, because it's a layered oxide material, so it doesn't have the inherent stability that some of these other ones do, and it also has a different cost profile, and it's not as safe, right? So you can render lithium-ion packs, NMC-based packs safe, just like any of this stuff. It's the cell level safety matters, but it's not what dictates if the solution is safe. That's the engineering behind the pack. And so, like a lot of the early iterations, there's room for improvement there,
and that costs money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As you think about, there's a cell level cost which is important,
Yeah.
dollars per kilowatt hour,
Yep.
and probably the most important thing in vehicle applications.
Yep.
But in stationary storage applications, there's a system level cost.
Yep.
And that actually becomes a key upfront CapEx metric. And then maybe there's even the operating cost of this asset over 20 years,
Yeah.
which is, I think we're starting to find out actually even more impactful than the CapEx piece.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, if you're working on something for that kind of time scale, you can't be out there touching it every couple months.
Right.
You're just going to continue to add more and more costs. And as
Right.
you have fallout, like, man, it just
Right.
compounds, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, sometimes it's pay me now or pay me later kind of thing. So you can put in a reliable solution and not have to worry about it, or you can put in something that's dirt cheap and have to go and touch it all the time. So I think that's and we're learning and growing there, and on the safety side, it's evolving and getting better, which is wonderful. And a lot of it's at the pack engineering, using the right tool for the job. And I think that LFP is doing a great job. I still don't think it's fundamentally the right solution for this application, but it's definitely better than what we started with, and the demand is so high, and it's a very important problem to solve. And so the sooner we can get the right solution out there, the better, because it's on many fronts. There's the supply chain aspect, there's the environmental aspect of it. If these things last longer, they're lower emissions to make. Like, you want to be using that as soon as possible, and so mature it as quickly as you can. And it's pretty interesting. Like, the more and more I dig into this particular flavor that came up, right? And we can go back to what did we see in that conference room in the second half of the day. It was about large format cells cycling like really, really well, projecting out well over 6,000 cycles. And it's like, that is very different than what I've seen on any of the other types of chemistry. And from my perspective for this, like, I didn't want to work on taking something that, like a layered oxide material that had better energy density, but, fundamentally would be a much more uphill battle to get the longevity. And work on that. I don't want to try and take something that gets 1,500 cycles and turn it into 10,000 cycles. That's a really difficult thing.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time.
Because of the cycles of learning.
And you may never get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take something that is tailor-built for that. It's like, it is very good at being stable, right? And like, and just try and get a cost down on that and leverage its advantages, and maybe you can walk up the energy density on that. So the other thing I learned is like the reason that this thing was able to be there in a large format prismatic cell is because it plugs into an LFP BOM pretty well, right?
Mm-hmm. BOM being bill of materials.
Yeah, bill of materials. Thanks for my alphabet soup here. So basically. So you can take these active materials, not that it's completely trivial, but you can make them work with the same binders and the same carbons, the same manufacturing system, even on the same lines.
Yeah.
So the cells look just like LFP.
Which I think is one of the key advantages of chemistry like sodium ion.
Yeah.
People talk about it being a drop-in into the lithium-ion, manufacturing process. And that certainly seems to be true on the cell manufacturing lines. Maybe not 100% true on the material processing side, but
it's pretty close.
Pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, even the way that you make the NFP material, it's very similar.
Take advantage of the $1 trillion of capital that's in the ground today on lithium ion. And my thesis on that is that it's almost impossible to compete in these volume markets anyway.
Yeah.
If you're trying to, from scratch, create an entirely new manufacturing platform.
And I think the thing that got me excited about that, and again, like, why am I looking at something, a material that I have never even seen before in a large format prismatic cell, cycling really well, because it builds on the shoulders of LFP, right? But it's different, right? And so that is part of the exciting part. This is just the start, right? I mean, there are huge engineering level improvements that can be made just in treating it the way that it wants to be treated, from a binder perspective and coating perspective and getting it up to snuff. A lot of the development that's been done on LFP for the last 10, 15 years that turned it from like pretty crap to very, very good. This thing's already very good at what it does and can get even better, and so that's on just how you make these cells. But the performance is another animal, right? So,
well, let's talk about the performance
Yeah.
of this material. So where is NFPP on energy density relative to LFP?
yeah, so that's a great question. So today it's half. So if you take watt hour, and we're talking energy density, right? So watt hours per liter.
Yep.
So if you take the same size cell, it's half the energy in NFPP. And there's ways to walk that up, and I think it's going to get there. There's engineering solutions that need to happen. That's on the binders and conductive additives and coatings and things like that continue to increase loading and walk it up a little bit. There's room to grow on the material itself, which is pretty interesting. I mean, if you look at LFP, it's asymptotes there already. Graphite is very, very good, right? And it's probably not getting a lot better. LFP itself I think they're getting like 160 milliamp hours per gram, and theoretical is 165. So
Yeah. So you're already at the end of the curve.
Yeah.
The learning curve there.
So we were talking about the energy density of LFP is, it continues to improve, but the material level improvements are about where they're going to be. There's other materials like LMFP, for example, which has manganese substituted in there. It increases energy density a little bit. It has stability challenges. Manganese dissolves and can for this application be a big challenge. But the point is that on the NFPP side, there's room for improvement on the cathode specific capacity a little bit, and then there's on the anode there's quite a bit of room for improvement. So hard carbon is the anode for these materials, for these cells. Basically any of these flavors that I talked about, oxides, Prussian blue analogs, polyanion, they're basically today are paired with hard carbon.
And what exactly is hard carbon compared to a lithium-ion battery, which is graphite? What's the difference?
It's just the structure of the material, right? So when I talked about earlier, layered versus something else, it's the actual structure of the carbon itself makes it different and makes it store sodium well. And lithium,
Where does hard carbon come from?
Actually, that's one of the funny things about this. So hard carbon can be made from all sorts of stuff. So I've seen when we were in China, giant sacks of charred coconuts that are used as precursors for hard carbon. It can be rice husks. It can be asphaltenes. It can be pitch. It can actually be made from coal. It can be made from all sorts of stuff. So that's an interesting thing. Now, what you choose to use, for a stable supply chain for product at scale, probably I don't know if you're going to want to use this year's coconuts versus last year's coconuts.
Exactly. Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's exciting that it can use these other
and not 100%
materials.
bottlenecked by what the supply chain in China, which I think graphite, some large 90+% of the world's graphite comes from China, right?
That's right. Yeah. And if we're talking about peak specifically, we want to do this here in the States, right? And so we've got a ton of sodium. Actually, I think it's over 90% of the world's sodium's here. Not that there's not a lot other places, but we've got a lot here.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot of oil and gas expertise and companies doing that. And
companies like ExxonMobil are working on turning the byproducts of a refining process into hard carbon anodes for batteries.
Yeah, and if someone knows how to do something consistently at scale, it's probably those guys. So that'd be a great way to leverage our already strengths here for something a little bit different.
So let's bring it back to cost. So if we think about the cost of an ESS, an energy storage system, there's three buckets, and these have changed dramatically over time, right? So there's the cost of the cell.
Yep.
There's the cost of the system.
Yep.
And then there's the cost of deploying the system and then running it for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And maintenance of it, how much energy is lost in the round trip cycle called round trip efficiency, all this kind of stuff. And historically, the most important factor in this cost stack up was the cell cost. It was the biggest piece.
Yeah.
It's still important.
Yeah.
Where do you think we are today on, and let's talk about NFPP specifically, because I think this is where the conversation gets muddled, is if you just talk about sodium-ion batteries, like that could be, likely actually is, the layered oxides. So for NFPP, on a dollars per kilowatt hour basis, where do you think it is relative to LFP, which is at massive scale? And when, if ever, do you think that it will approach parity or crossover?
That's a great question. So on a purely cost basis, the sodium-ion stuff is more expensive today. So dollars per kilowatt hour, NFPP is more expensive than LFP. And I think the key is, like, what is going to deliver the most value to the customer here? So you have to look at all the buckets here, because there's the cell. How much do you pay for it? What does it do? If you know what it does, then that's how you design the system, because you have to turn a battery cell into a system that takes energy from the grid and gives it back, right? Safely and reliably in different conditions, right? So that's the second bucket. And then what do you have to do with it over time to continue to perform that? So
let's break it down on each of these axes. So let's just talk about the cell itself. Dollars per kilowatt hour. Where do you think LFP is today?
So that's actually pretty hard to put your finger on. Spot prices are down like $50, you know.
$50 per kilowatt hour.
Exactly, $50
Maybe
per
even lower.
Yeah, which is shocking and awesome at the same time, right? Because, I am not married to sodium, right? I want to solve this problem, right? And so it's like that. I want as much deployment as we can, and the more affordable it is, the easier it is to deploy this kind of stuff. So with its engineering solution, LFP does a pretty good job, and it's around $50. The NFPP stuff is more like $100
today at its current scale.
At its current scale, which is actually not bad for a new technology. Actually, if you think about how long it took for lithium-ion to get down to $100, very long time.
Yeah.
And this is where it's starting, right? The materials floor is lower for sodium-ion. And
how much lower is the material floor? And when you say material floor, what do you mean?
So bill of materials floor. So like if you're looking at what should the cathode cost, what should the anode cost?
Looking at its raw material.
Looking at its raw materials, yeah. And so I guess there's one additional nuance to the difference between lithium and sodium-ion batteries, and that's on the construction itself. It does use one different thing, and that's on the anode current collector. Instead of using copper, it uses aluminum.
Which is cheaper also.
Which is cheaper. It gives you a little bit of price advantage. I think that the devil in the details there is it's about twice as thick. And so it hurts your already, struggle bus of energy density there.
Struggle bus. Get on the struggle bus, baby.
Oh man, yeah. So, but that's okay because it's actually an advantage from a chemistry standpoint.
So at a bill of material level, meaning the cost of the materials that go into a LFP cell and the cost of materials that go into an NFPP cell. Yeah. What's the difference?
Yeah, I project it to be between 20 and 30% lower on dollars per kilowatt hour basis for sodium-ion, based on the roadmaps that I see today from material suppliers.
And on a pure BOM cost in a cell, it's what, like three or four times lower?
No, that's what I'm talking about. On the oh, you mean the active materials? Yeah. So per kg, yes. But that's the thing that is tricky, right? We get back on the struggle bus, because dollars per kilowatt hour, right?
Right. And so if you have, let's call it 3x lower material cost, but your energy density is half. Yeah. That means you need to make two cells. Yeah. With those materials.
Exactly.
And the question is, do you end up ahead or behind after you're making two cells? Yeah. And then as you think about improvements, this is why energy density actually matters in this application, actually.
100%. And that's a common misconception, right? Energy density doesn't matter for grid storage. That's a bunch of crap, actually. Like, that's not true at all. Right. Because you definitely care about cost. Right. And that's something that compounds. Yep. Right. So, like, if I've got half the energy density, I'm running twice as many meters through the coder, right? And I'm making twice as many connections at the system level.
I mean, I think of it as very simplistically. So the cost of the materials of the cell is, call it 3x lower.
Yeah.
But you need, if the energy density is half, you need to make 2 cells of sodium ion for the 1 cell of LFP.
Yep. That's right.
And so all the work that goes into making those cells, you've got to pay for.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the material cost has to be even lower in order to make that up. But if you could increase the energy density, suppose your penalty is only 25% instead of 50% today, then you would only have to make 1.5 cells to have the same amount of energy, right? So that's how the math works. 100%. What are the chances of that happening?
It's definitely going to happen, right? I mean, the development is rapid, in China today, which is super exciting, And the good part is, as we get to the rest of the system, you'll see that even before, dollars per kilowatt hour, sodium ion is cheaper.
Yep.
The solution's better. It delivers more value to the customer.
So we'll get to that, but just at the cell level, and if you're an EV manufacturer, you probably care about the cell more purely than we do at the system level. What are we hearing from our suppliers, who are the largest LFP manufacturers in the world? When do they think, on a dollars per kilowatt hour basis, the NFPP cell will cross over LFP?
2027.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's quite different than what the academics are saying in the U.S.
That's right. Yeah. Which is great, and it's not like, from one person.
Yeah.
Like we put I mentioned early days, it's basically tech scout helping you guys, right? Then I'm supply chain hat, right? It's like, okay, let's figure out what's reality, what's roadmap for these kind of things. And it's like, it's from the materials suppliers, it's from multiple cell developers, it's from technology developers kind of around the world. And then you put together like a holistic picture of where is this going? Because we want to meet it where it's at, right? We're building and deploying systems with this, and we don't want to slow it down, So we want the energy density to ramp up as quick as it can.
Yeah.
And the stability improvements that have been made over the last 12 months enable something that's like just a much, much better solution already.
Right.
And so it's kind of, it's still worth working on energy density because it compounds. But
and I think this is a crucial point also for the broader conversation within the country about where should we place our research bets, where should we build companies to go work on various things. And I think it's part of the reason why we are trying to be quite open with our experience, what we're seeing in the labs in China, what we're seeing coming off the line. You're going to be presenting test data of really state-of-the-art NFPP sodium-ion cells at the International Battery Show in Florida. This is crucial for us as a country as we think about our industrial strategy to really understand the reality of what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And we really don't want to have another situation where the West goes, on the lithium side, LFP is not as good as NMC, the energy density is too low, cycle life's not there, and then watch China just massively blow past all those problems and take over the entire industry. I mean, it was a massive blind spot for the whole Western world.
That's right.
The scientific community here. And we're seeing it happen again.
Yeah. That's
sodium ion will never be there. There's a paper that shows it might get to cost parity in 2033. Like,
energy densities.
Guys, these cells are being produced today in China at half the cost of what is being predicted for the end of the decade in the academic world.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I said early, it's LFP's LFP, right? We missed that boat. Let's not do it again, And ironically, like we invented those materials.
Right.
In this case, it's not necessarily true, but we don't have to be laggards or completely miss the bus.
Right. So that's at the cell level. And a lot of the academic debate is at the cell level because it's kind of, that's what labs do. Now let's talk about application.
Yeah.
And the next bucket in cost, which is the system.
Yeah.
And, we've seen, I think, coming out of the test work that you've done, both at our suppliers, but also within your labs, some really exciting performance data on NFPP, which then impacts the system cost.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah, I mean, so first, this application's actually really hard. It's 20 years, right, that this thing has to sit out there and deliver energy reliably. So you can get there with LFP, but the way that you get there is you liquid cool these cells and you maintain them at 25 degrees Celsius plus or minus 2 degrees. And you've got...
Whether it's in the desert of Arizona or it's in northern Minnesota.
Yeah, which, it's, those are fun. Does it really have to work at minus 40? I guess, but the batteries don't like to work hot and cold at the same time. So, but the way that they manage that is, with liquid cooled thermal management, which actually like one of the main failure points for these systems. Like, why do you have to go touch them? Is because you're running a chiller all the time, and that is not the most reliable system. And so
a chiller just being an air conditioner, right?
It's basically an air conditioner. Yeah. And
no one's ever had an air conditioner break in their house over 20 years, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so...
Oh, and by the way, when it starts leaking coolant all over your batteries...
It makes them light on fire.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem.
Which is actually, that's the other kind of funny thing, is a lot of the battery fires are actually not from the cells themselves.
Yeah.
It's from either the thermal management system or the safety system.
Yeah, the electronics itself.
I feel it's like cruel irony that the safety system can also cause your battery to catch on fire. But, the interesting thing that really, I mentioned like the stability improvements we've seen over the last 12 months. What does that mean? What do I mean by that? It's so cycling stability was always, pretty good for these materials, but the big improvement was on thermal stability. And what I've seen in the test data is basically at 45 degrees Celsius, these batteries actually degrade less than lithium-ion batteries at 25 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Which is a big deal. And actually, just with the test data and, modeling predictions and things like that, it's shocking to look at those data. And when I go out and I'm making, requests for proposals for cell suppliers, and I'm putting those targets on there, I'm like, this just seems unrealistically good, from a stability standpoint. But it's based on real data. That's where it is today, which is like I said, early days in a technology. That's not a bad place to be.
Yeah. So you've got a technology that has fundamental advantages in stability, which impacts cycle life, temperature control, safety, all the sort of system level costs. But it's lower energy density, so you still need more cells to get the same amount of energy.
That's right.
Maybe you pack them better in the system. Talk a little bit now about the operating parameters of, these types of cells in a system for 20 years. And to put that in context, I think this is not unusual in the world of commoditizing technologies, right? Like in the beginning, the most expensive thing in that, going back to the stack of costs we talked about, cell, system, operating site, basically, right? Operating project. In the beginning, the cells were the most expensive thing. That's what everybody talks about, dollars per kilowatt per cell. That cell has gone down like 4x in cost in the last 2 years. It's now no longer the biggest part of the thing. And then you've got the system piece, but the piece that has not been attacked really at all, because it's fundamental to lithium-ion chemistry, is the operating parameters of the system. Its reliability, how much maintenance you have to do to it with human beings that live in, the United States and get paid a lot of money. What the economic round trip efficiency of the cell is, how much energy do you lose every time you charge and discharge? How does that all play out with NFPP?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's a super important part to that. And before we get to that, I want to mention a little bit about the system design and the stability, because it kind of ties everything together here. Like with a lot of things, in batteries, nothing's free. Okay, so if you want really long cycle life,
no free lunch in life.
No free lunch, right? And you also want
that's what I tell my kids.
High energy density. Like those things fight, bad. And for this chemistry, the more and more I dig into it, the more I'm like, fundamentally, the same things that make the energy density poor on this are things that make its stability just incredible. Physics-based reasons, right? Like the voltage window is smaller and lower. It's like, oh man, that really hurts my energy density. But guess what? Like the stability is better. The and when we talk about how long these things last in the system, we'll get to that third bucket, like what's the degradation rate? The expansion and contraction. So batteries actually breathe. You're actually moving mass from anode to cathode every time you cycle them. And so you can think about basically it's moving water between two sponges. And these things expand and contract. And what happens there is you can break off parts of material, get capacity loss, and reform.
You lose a part of the sponge.
Exactly. Yeah. And which means that you can move less water back and forth, which means like the capacity continues to degrade. But because these are big, stable structures, their energy density is worse, but their stability is incredible, right? So they're easier on electrolytes, which means you can use things that are different. I think that's going to be a fundamental advantage going forward on cost, because we're going to be able to use different things. It's also going to be an advantage on safety. The expansion and contraction being so much less, like those are just fundamental to the materials that are enabling some of these other performance things. So it's not just a fluke that the test data looks like this.
Right.
It's not like it just happened on its own either. Right. And people worked hard to make this happen. But what does that mean at the system level? Basically the way that you have to treat these batteries to get the same level of safety and performance at different temperatures and things like that and hit the lifetime targets is just fundamentally different. So when you look at a sodium-ion system versus a lithium-ion system, if you're looking with an LFP lens and you just take something that's half the energy density and put it into an LFP system, it's going to be worse. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You have to treat it differently because it's not the same. You don't treat your kids the exact same kind of thing. They're very different. And so the system is different, and then what it does over time is also different, right? So you have what you're used to for lithium ion. Oh, I got to go touch the chiller twice a year, and I got to go clean fan filter units, and I got to, all these kind of things. And what environments can it behave in? What kind of ways do I hook it up? And then this system can be a little bit different. Its degradation rate is much slower, even with different thermal management schemes, even with different safety schemes, and again, we haven't talked about safety like hardly at all for this, but batteries in general, like they're not teddy bears, right? You have to treat them very carefully to make them safe. Now, that being said, different versions of batteries behave differently under different runaway conditions. LFP does a pretty good job relative to NMC. So that's the and part of the reason is it's not an oxide. It doesn't provide the oxygen to the party. The other part is just the energy densities.
So it's not an oxidizer. It's not actually fuel for the fire.
Yeah, that's the rough part of those other batteries is they provide the spark and the fuel. Yeah. And the oxygen. Yeah. Like that's the triangle. Bro. Yeah. You're gonna have a problem.
There you go. And so actually it's not surprising the oxide versions, the layered oxide versions of sodium ion their safety properties are actually not that great.
Which actually, so
we should not be surprised.
It was reassuring when I saw that because when I went over there, I'm like, but I heard sodium ion's safer. How?
Yeah, how could that possibly be?
How is that possible? Yeah. There's more nuance to it in that, say sodiated hard carbon's less reacted than lithiated graphite, right? And so there's other things that make it, yes, it is safer, even in that case, but that is definitely the spiciest version of
We're definitely going to have to do a podcast like fully nerd out on safety properties themselves, because this is a pretty deep topic.
Well, it's really like safety is it's very important, and its system level is how you control it. But there's the thing I want to touch on is the energy density penalty. Chemistry aside, going from NMC to LFP makes it easier to manage thermal runaway for LFP. The energy density penalty between LFP and NFPP makes it easier to manage thermal runaway for those. Assuming like the amount of energy per kilowatt hour and all those things is the same, and thermal mass and all those kind of things. But in general, those are parts of the reason why it's easier to manage the safety on NFPP. Is it, fundamentally safe? There is no fundamentally safe battery, right?
You're
If you
storing
think that
energy.
there is, go lick the
Yeah.
leads and tell me what you think.
Right.
It's
right.
like they're
of
not
a,
safe.
Even of a 9-volt
Yeah.
battery, right?
Yeah,
In
but
your pocket.
you can make
Yeah.
safe products with it,
Yeah.
right? But it costs you money.
Yeah, you have to put
that.
the engineering around
You put the engineering around it, just like you can engineer in lifetime to LFP, right? But you do that by keeping it at 25 degrees, like plus or minus 2 degrees, or you void the warranty, right? It's very important. In this one, it's just more resilient
Right.
because you're asking a fish to swim, right? Not to climb a tree, right? This is what it's made for fundamentally. From my perspective, the more and more I learn about it, the more I'm like, okay, this is just the right solution. And that's why, these long-term benefits, operation and maintenance, they're easier to point
Put
to.
some numbers on that. So we talked a little bit about cost of cells,
Yeah.
in the $50 to $100 per kilowatt hour
Yeah.
basis. How much savings is there over the life of a 20-year project if you start to add up these system-level benefits that are enabled by the NFPP chemistry?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking, but the modeling's like $60 a kilowatt hour.
$60 a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So and that's on an MPV basis, right?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
it's not adding up 20 years of savings,
Yeah.
and that's 60. It's discounting that cost value by time across the 20-year period,
Yeah.
right? $60 a kilowatt hour. That's
Wait.
more than the cost of the battery cells. So you
Wait.
get them for free.
You can think about it like that, right? It's like when my wife goes shopping and look at all the money I saved. Like that's not true. You just spent a bunch of money, but you saved a little bit because of the sale. But yes, in general, like what it's value to the customer.
The beauty
right?
of this argument in this industry, and one of the things I really like about this industry, it's similar to the argument of electric cars over their life are much lower cost than, ICE cars.
100%.
A lot of it is the maintenance, a lot of it is the cost of the fuel,
Yep.
right? That's a pretty hard argument to make to a consumer to do the full total cost of ownership calculation and realize, oh, actually, I might have to pay a little bit more in the beginning, but overall, over the life of the vehicle, it's lower cost.
Yep.
This is actually a pretty easy argument to make within our industry.
Yeah.
Because, it's project-based. Every single project has a giant spreadsheet around it that basically models out all of the costs from CapEx to the interest on the loan to the operating, budget to the, long-term service agreement, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have a much better chance in this type of a selling environment to convince a customer that, over that lifetime, there's real value there.
Yeah.
And, we can basically share that value.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where Peaks. That's the point. Is that the sodium-ion stuff today has been looked in the LFP lens, right?
Right.
And so all those things that we're talking about, the fundamental advantages, you
Yeah.
just completely washed away.
Yep.
And you're just saying, oh, how much does it cost? But you know what? That is just such a small sliver. Of
How much
the
does it
value.
cost to buy the equipment up front?
Yeah.
And by the way, we're not conceding that point in any way,
Eventually,
shape, or form.
it's going to beat it on that too.
We're going to beat it on cost within the next 3 years.
Yeah.
And compete with, CATL landed system costs.
Yeah.
Dollar per dollar on the CapEx.
That's
but
right.
then there's all this value that comes on the back end. And then the cherry on top is the safety piece, which in the world of Moss Landing and, just the continuous fires that you're seeing, which are, serious. There are serious issues around health, even if people didn't actually get injured in the fire itself.
That's right.
The emissions, it's creating a backlash within our communities. People don't want to have, large-scale batteries in their backyard. So there's, I think, a lot of value on the safety side. Yeah. The one thing, though, on the safety is everybody talks about it, but then most buyers go to the low-cost bidder.
Yeah, that's right.
Or they have to convince their management why they're spending more money, with Tesla as an example versus, tier 4 Chinese company that, just put a bunch of batteries in a shipping container and dropped it into the U.S. harbor. So how do we quantify safety advantages and I really mean quantify in terms of dollars and cents, that's a key unsolved problem, I would say, in the industry. And this is something that, if there's people listening to the pod that want to sink their teeth into a juicy problem, it's like, okay, how can we give ammunition to the buyer who wants to buy a system and monetize the safety aspect of it? There's a whole set of probabilities. There's, deep analytical modeling that I think we as an industry could develop a framework for thinking about, the pluses and minuses of different solutions from a safety perspective.
I mean, the easy thing to do is point to things that aren't there anymore. What are failure points that disappear? But quantifying safety is a huge challenge, just in general. I mean, and I give something that I think is pretty important is just because you say you make an LFP battery doesn't mean it is safe or it's not safe, right? Within the same chemistry, even the same footprint, it has a lot to do with manufacturing quality and things like that. That you got to have the actual test data to show how it responds, and then there's the probability of failure. So eventually, you're going to get some kind of failure, and what happens depends on not only the chemistry, but the design and the manufacturing quality and things like that. So it's not necessarily created equal.
Yeah. Brandon, this has been a great conversation. I know I enjoyed it and learned a lot actually myself.
Good.
Really appreciate you taking the time to come on the pod. We unfortunately didn't actually get to a whole bunch of cool stuff around solid-state batteries.
Yeah.
There's a lot to go through there and your experience through solid power, et cetera.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll save that for a future episode.
Sounds good.
Maybe there's even solid-state batteries that could be made out of sodium ions. What do you think?
Definitely possible. People working on it.
Awesome.
It's a tough problem, but yeah, definitely.
Great. Thanks again for being on IONS, and I'll see you around the lab.
Yeah, thanks.
You down with NFP? Yeah, you know me. Who's down with NFP? Every battery. Grid power's got a problem. Lithium ain't cheap. Mining's getting harder. Plus the earth's knee deep in shortages and setbacks. Price just won't drop. So we flip the whole script. Now sodium's on top. Ion flow strong. NFP in the stack. Charging up fast. No fire. No crack. Stable, abundant. It ain't hard to find. Made from table salt. Now that's real grind. We keep the grid steady. Peak low retain. Storage so clean. Utilities scream our name. Sodium ion game, yeah, we breaking the mold. No rare earth needed, just efficiency gold. You down with NFP? Yeah, you know me. Who's down with NFP? Every battery. Now let me tell you why this tech's so hot. Sodium ion flex when the grid gets caught. Renewable power, we store that too. Sun and wind in the mix, now the lights stay blue. Cycling through thousands, efficiency tight. No fade, no stress, keep the charge just right. Lithium's got limits, but sodium's free. With pyrophosphate, we stack energy. Grid scale, home scale, all in the zone. From factories to cities, we hold our own. Forget that old game, let's flip the key. Sodium ion revolution, that's NFP. You down with NFP? Yeah, you know me. Who's down with NFP? Every battery. From coast to coast, grid storage so clean. Sodium ion squad got the new routine. Fire safe, cost cut, built for the ride. NFP stays charged, put the doubts aside. Pick energy out.